My name is Catherine Elena Morrison, and on September 15th, 2023, at exactly 7:30 a.m., I stood before the antique mirror in my childhood bedroom, believing I was about to live the most perfect day of my life. The ivory silk wedding dress, a stunning 1950s design I'd discovered at an estate sale in Mount Pleasant, and lovingly restored myself, fit my 28-year-old figure like it had been crafted specifically for this moment. Every pearl button gleamed in the golden morning sunlight, streaming through the white lace curtains my grandmother had sewn 50 years earlier. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother Margaret whispered as she fastened the final button at the nape of my neck, her hands trembling so violently I could feel each shake through the delicate fabric. "You look absolutely radiant. Your father would have been so incredibly proud to walk you down this aisle today." Her voice broke completely on the word proud. And I watched in the mirror as tears began streaming down her carefully applied makeup, leaving dark tracks of mascara on her cheeks like war paint of grief. Dad had died suddenly of a massive heart attack 3 years earlier, at only 52, collapsing in his architectural office while reviewing blueprints for a new community center. "I wish more than anything he could be here today," I said softly, touching the 3-strand pearl necklace that had belonged to my great-grandmother. "But I know in my heart he'd absolutely love Marcus." Mom smiled through her tears, but I caught something troubling in her expression. "Catherine, sweetheart," she said, carefully setting down the hairbrush with unusual deliberation. "There's something I need to say, even though it might sound silly. It's just a mother's intuition." I turned to face her, fully seeing the worry lines that had deepened around her eyes. "What is it, Mom?" "Marcus is wonderful on paper, darling. Handsome, successful, from a good family. But sometimes—" She paused, choosing her words with obvious care. "Sometimes when I watch him with you, it feels too perfect, too practiced. Like he's performing the role of the perfect fiancé rather than simply being himself. And the way he looks at Isabella sometimes—" She shook her head. "It's probably nothing, but your father always said to trust a mother's instincts about the men her daughter chooses." Her words sent an unexpected chill through me, but I pushed the feeling aside. "Mom, you're just nervous about giving away your only daughter. Marcus loves me." "Of course, sweetheart. I'm sure I'm just being overprotective." But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. At 28, I owned Threads of Grace, a boutique specializing in restored vintage clothing that had become Charleston's premier destination for discerning brides. What had started as a tiny storefront with $15,000 from my savings had grown into a business generating nearly $300,000 annually. My success gave me confidence I wasn't marrying for security. I was choosing partnership with someone who appreciated my independence. That someone was supposed to be Marcus Alexander Hayes, a 31-year-old architect with Hayes and Associates. We'd met 18 months ago at a gallery opening where he'd approached me near a painting of Charleston's Rainbow Row with what seemed like genuine appreciation for art and craftsmanship. But looking back now, I realized there were warning signs I'd rationalized away. Like 6 months ago, when I'd mentioned excitedly that Isabella had helped me negotiate a difficult vendor contract, and Marcus had said, "She's surprisingly sharp for someone from her background." The casual condescension in his tone should have troubled me more. Or 3 months ago, when Isabella had worn a stunning vintage bracelet to my engagement party, and when I'd complimented it, she'd flushed and said it was a thank you gift from Marcus for helping with wedding planning. The bracelet was worth at least $1,000, far too expensive and intimate for such a casual gesture. Most troubling was last month's incident. Isabella and I had been discussing my expansion plans when Marcus arrived unexpectedly at my boutique. He'd clearly been drinking unusual for him, and when Isabella suggested I should be more realistic about my limitations, Marcus had immediately agreed, saying, "Bella's right, Catherine. You shouldn't bite off more than you can chew." It was the first time he'd ever sided against me in any discussion, and he'd used her nickname like it was natural to him. But the most unsettling incident had occurred just 1 week ago during our rehearsal dinner at Magnolia Gardens. I'd been discussing business with my accountant when I accidentally picked up Marcus's laptop to check my email. A message thread caught my eye. The subject line read, "Meeting with Bella privately," and I glimpsed fragments like, "Careful after the ceremony," and "She can't suspect," before Marcus quickly closed the laptop. When I asked about it, his reaction was telling. His face went pale. His hands shook noticeably as he snapped the laptop shut, and he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said, "Oh, that's just coordinating some wedding surprises with Isabella. You know how detail-oriented she gets." His laugh had sounded forced, unnatural, nothing like his usual warm chuckle. And for the rest of the evening, I'd noticed him and Isabella exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever I approached. Isabella Rose Hartwell had been my closest friend since college. She'd grown up in a struggling single-parent household after her father abandoned the family when she was 12, leaving her mother to work 2 jobs to keep their tiny downtown apartment. I'd always admired Isabella's resilience and determination to succeed despite her difficult circumstances. But lately, I'd noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She'd become increasingly critical of my relationship with Marcus, making comments like, "Are you sure he's not too good to be true?" Or, "Sometimes I wonder if you're seeing him clearly." At first, I'd interpreted this as protective concern, but there was something else in her tone, a kind of bitter undertone that made me uncomfortable. When my previous relationship had ended 2 years earlier after David cheated with a coworker, Isabella had been my lifeline. She'd call me at 2 a.m. when insomnia made loneliness unbearable, bringing homemade soup when grief made eating impossible. Her support had been unwavering then, which made her recent negativity all the more confusing. Now, at 8:15 a.m., Isabella knocked softly before entering with chamomile tea and a warm croissant on my grandmother's china. She looked stunning in her emerald bridesmaid dress, but I immediately noticed she was speaking more rapidly than usual, a nervous habit from college that only surfaced when she was deeply anxious about something. "Good morning, beautiful bride. I brought caffeine because we need to keep your energy up today, and I was thinking we should review the timeline one more time to make sure everything goes perfectly, because you know how I worry about details, and I just want today to be absolutely flawless for you." She was talking in a breathless rush, her words tumbling over each other in a way that seemed forced rather than excited. When she set down the tray, I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "Bella, are you okay? You seem nervous." "Nervous? Me no, not nervous, just excited, so excited for you and Marcus." But her smile was too bright, too wide, and she immediately busied herself with unnecessary adjustments to my dress train. My Uncle David arrived at precisely 8:30 a.m., dressed in his formal morning coat, and carrying himself with the quiet dignity that had always reminded me of my father. After Mom left to prepare for the ceremony, he sat in the antique chair by the window, his expression serious in a way that commanded attention. "Ah, Catherine," he said in his measured voice. "I know your mother shared her concerns, and I want to add something from a different perspective. Your father was not just my brother, he was my business partner for 10 years before he started his own firm. He taught me something crucial about both business and life. Trust but verify." He leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped together. "In business, we learned never to sign a contract without reading every line, never to hire someone without checking references, never to invest without examining the books. Your father would apply the same principle to relationships. He'd say, 'David, when something feels off, investigate. Don't make excuses for people who matter to you. Hold them to higher standards, not lower ones.'" Uncle David's eyes met mine directly. "You mentioned that email to your mother, and then you let Marcus's explanation satisfy you. But your father would have asked to see the entire conversation. He would have said that people who love you shouldn't need to have private meetings about you, especially not with your closest friend. He would have wanted you to trust your instincts and dig deeper." His words hit me like cold water. I had accepted Marcus's dismissive explanation because I wanted to believe it, because investigating further would have meant acknowledging my growing doubts. "I know it's your wedding day," Uncle David continued gently, "and I pray I'm wrong about everything, But if something doesn't feel right later, if you see or hear anything that troubles you, don't explain it away. Your father always said that smart people sometimes become their own worst enemies by being too understanding, too willing to give others the benefit of the doubt when their gut tells them otherwise. The weight of both conversations, Mom's intuitive concerns and Uncle David's practical wisdom, settled over me like a heavy cloak. But this was my wedding day, and I was determined to focus on joy rather than doubts. We'd chosen Rosewood Manor, a meticulously restored antebellum estate, at 847 Magnolia Road for our celebration. The property featured a magnificent white-columned mansion surrounded by century-old oak trees, draped in Spanish moss with formal gardens that bloomed year-round. The ceremony would take place at 4 p.m. in the Rose Garden, followed by dinner and dancing on the stone terrace overlooking the fountain, where gardenias perfumed the evening air, with Charleston's harbor lights twinkling in the distance. As the morning progressed, everything unfolded with clockwork precision, but I couldn't shake the echo of those morning conversations. Mom's intuitive warnings about Marcus's performance and Uncle David's practical advice about trusting but verifying kept surfacing in my mind like persistent ghosts. When the photographer arrived for pre-ceremony portraits, I watched Marcus through the window as he chatted with the other groomsmen on the manor's front porch. He looked relaxed and confident, every inch the successful architect and devoted groom. But as I observed him more carefully, I began to notice what Mom might have meant about his performance quality. His laugh seemed slightly too hearty, his gestures a bit too practiced, his attention to the other men just a shade too deliberate, as if he were conscious of being watched and wanted to project the image of a man without a care in the world. When Isabella appeared on the porch to coordinate some detail with the wedding planner, I saw Marcus's entire demeanor shift. His posture straightened, his smile became more genuine, and for a moment, he looked more alive than I'd seen him all morning. The sight sent an inexplicable chill through me, but I forced myself to turn away from the window. Whatever doubts were plaguing me could wait until after we were married. Today was about celebrating love, commitment, and the future Marcus and I would build together. But even as I tried to focus on the joy of the occasion, Uncle David's words echoed in my mind, "Trust but verify." And deep in my chest, a small voice that sounded remarkably like my father's whispered that verification might be more important than I wanted to admit. At exactly 3:45 p.m., the string quartet began playing Pachelbel's Canon in D, the processional music floating across the estate's manicured grounds and mixing with the natural sounds of late summer. Uncle David offered me his arm with a smile that couldn't quite hide his own emotional turmoil. He'd been Dad's younger brother and closest friend, and I could see my father's gentle strength reflected in his weathered face. "Remember what we talked about this morning," he whispered as we paused at the threshold. "Trust your instincts and don't be afraid to verify what matters." Through the tall windows, I could see our 50 guests rising from their white Chiavari chairs, their faces turning toward the house with expressions of anticipation. The afternoon sun cast everything in golden light, the roses in full September bloom, the Spanish moss swaying in the warm breeze, the faces of people I loved, gathered to witness this moment. As we stepped onto the stone pathway, scattered with white rose petals, I saw Marcus waiting beneath an elaborate archway of climbing roses and ivory fabric. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray morning coat, and when our eyes met across the garden, he smiled. But something about that smile made my heart skip with uncertainty rather than joy. It seemed practiced, almost rehearsed, like an actor hitting his mark rather than a man overwhelmed by love. His eyes appeared to focus somewhere over my left shoulder, and I noticed him swallowing hard repeatedly, not the nervous excitement of a groom, but something more anxious. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Williams began once I reached the altar and took Marcus's hands in mine. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God and this loving community to witness the marriage of Catherine Elena Morrison and Marcus Alexander Hayes." During his words about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of trust, and fidelity? I caught Isabella's eye as she stood to my left, holding my bouquet. She was smiling, but something was wrong with her usual composure. Instead of her characteristic calm confidence, she seemed to be talking to herself under her breath, a nervous habit I remembered from college exams. Her lips moved almost imperceptibly, as if she were rehearsing lines or giving herself a pep talk. When I raised my eyebrows questioningly, she quickly stopped and gave me an exaggerated thumbs up, but her smile looked strained around the edges. Marcus Alexander Hayes. Reverend Williams addressed my groom with solemn authority. Do you take Catherine Elena Morrison to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health to love and to cherish, forsaking all others till death do you part? Marcus's response came after what felt like a beat too long, probably unnoticeable to our guests, but glaringly obvious to me standing directly in front of him. I do, he said clearly, but there was something hollow in his tone, something mechanical, that made those sacred words sound more like a business transaction than a heartfelt declaration of eternal love. When my turn came, I spoke my vows with genuine emotion. I do. Those words carried every dream I'd harbored about our future together. Children playing in a house filled with laughter, growing old together, while building something meaningful. The deep partnership I'd always believed was possible. The kiss we shared was sweet, but surprisingly brief. As we turned to face our family and friends as husband and wife, Marcus immediately began scanning the crowd rather than looking at me as if he were checking for someone specific or searching for an escape route. During the cocktail hour, I found myself observing details I might normally have missed Uncle David's words about verification echoing in my mind. Marcus spent an unusual amount of time in conversation with Isabella, seeking her out repeatedly throughout the reception in a way that struck me as odd for a groom who should have been focused on his new bride. Catherine, darling, my new mother-in-law, Patricia Hayes, said as she approached during cocktails. You look absolutely radiant tonight. Marcus is such a fortunate man, and Richard and I are thrilled to welcome you into our family. Thank you, Patricia, I replied, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the entire evening. As the golden hour approached, I noticed Marcus and Isabella standing together near the garden's central fountain, surrounded by the intoxicating scent of blooming gardenias. What I observed made my stomach clench with inexplicable unease. Marcus wasn't just talking to Isabella. He was standing closer to her than seemed appropriate, his hand resting on her bare arm just above the elbow, in a gesture that seemed intimate, almost possessive. Their heads were bent close together in intense conversation, their body language suggesting a familiarity that had nothing to do with casual friendship or wedding coordination. Isabella was nodding rapidly at whatever Marcus was saying, her expression serious rather than celebratory, and I noticed she kept glancing around nervously as if worried about being observed. When I began walking toward them, wanting to join whatever discussion seemed so absorbing, Isabella's behavior became even more telling. She spotted me approaching from about 10 feet away, and her reaction was immediate and unnatural. She suddenly threw back her head and burst into loud laughter. Too loud, too forced, while simultaneously stepping away from Marcus with movements that seemed almost frantic. Catherine, she called out, her voice pitched higher than normal with what sounded like barely contained panic. We were just saying how absolutely perfect the lighting is right now for photographs. The way the sunset hits the fountain is just magical, don't you think? But Marcus had already melted away into another group of guests without acknowledging my approach or making eye contact with me. As I reached Isabella's side, I noticed she was no longer talking rapidly as she had that morning. Instead, she'd become almost unnaturally quiet, answering my questions with brief responses and avoiding direct eye contact. You two seem to be having quite an intense discussion, I observed, trying to keep my tone light while studying her face carefully. Is everything okay? You both looked so serious. Oh, you know how I am about details, Isabella replied, but her usual confidence was gone. She was practically whispering now, and her eyes kept darting around the garden as if looking for escape routes. Just making sure the photographer captures all the shots you wanted. You know how much I want everything to be perfect for you. Her explanation sounded rehearsed, and the dramatic shift in her behavior, from this morning's nervous chatter to this evening's near silence, set off alarm bells in my mind. Before I could pursue the topic further, the band announced that dinner was about to be served. During dinner, Isabella delivered her maid of honor speech, and it was flawlessly executed, heartfelt, eloquent, and delivered with apparent sincerity that brought tears to many eyes. But as someone who'd known her for over a decade, I could detect the subtle signs of performance. Her gestures were slightly too dramatic, her pauses too perfectly timed, her emotional inflections just a shade too pronounced. Catherine has always deserved the very best that life has to offer. She concluded, raising her champagne glass toward our head table, because she gives the very best of herself to absolutely everyone around her. She's loyal beyond measure, compassionate to her core, and stronger than she even realizes. Marcus, you're getting an extraordinary woman who will make your life richer in ways you can't imagine yet. The applause was thunderous, but as I watched Isabella during Marcus's responding speech, I noticed she'd begun exhibiting yet another behavioral shift. Now she was constantly checking her phone, scrolling through it, with nervous energy that seemed completely inappropriate for the moment. When she thought no one was looking, her expression was tense, almost worried, as if she were expecting important news or waiting for something to happen. "Catherine," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly across the stone terrace. "Meeting you changed everything I thought I knew about what was possible in life. You've brought beauty, creativity, and strength into my world in ways I never expected." He paused, looking out at our guests rather than at me, which struck me as odd. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this new beginning with us." His words were appropriate and well delivered, but listening to him speak, I couldn't shake the feeling that his remarks felt somehow rehearsed and emotionally distant. There was none of the spontaneous joy and overwhelming happiness I'd hoped to hear from a man celebrating the happiest day of his life. As the evening wound toward its conclusion around 11 p.m., I found myself making mental notes of small inconsistencies that might have escaped my notice if not for the morning's conversations with Mom and Uncle David. Marcus kept checking his watch throughout the evening, not with the eager anticipation of a groom looking forward to his wedding night, but with the impatience of someone waiting for an appointment. Isabella's phone checking had become almost compulsive, and twice I caught her typing messages with rapid, nervous fingers before quickly hiding the screen when anyone approached. During the last dance, when Marcus and I should have been lost in romantic connection, I noticed him glancing over my shoulder repeatedly, seemingly tracking Isabella's movements around the terrace. "Ready to head upstairs, Mrs. Hayes?" Marcus asked as the last guest departed, using my new name with what should have been loving affection. But something in his delivery felt dutiful rather than romantic, like an actor delivering his final lines of a long performance. "I'm ready," I replied, though I suddenly felt nervous in a way I hadn't anticipated. As we climbed the grand staircase toward our honeymoon suite, Marcus carrying my dress train with mechanical efficiency, I couldn't shake my growing unease. The email subject line I'd glimpsed, "Meeting with Bella privately," kept echoing in my mind, along with Uncle David's advice about trusting but verifying. When we reached our door, Marcus's smile still didn't quite reach his eyes, and through the tall windows overlooking the terrace, I could see Isabella standing alone by the fountain, no longer checking her phone, but staring up at our windows with an expression I couldn't read from this distance. But the most unsettling detail of all was what I'd noticed during our final moments on the terrace. As Marcus and I had been saying goodnight to the last guests, I'd seen Isabella approach the estate manager and quietly ask about something that made him nod and hand her what looked like a spare room key. The sight had sent an inexplicable chill through me, but I'd been distracted by well-wishers and hadn't had time to process what I'd witnessed. Now, as Marcus closed our bedroom door behind us, that image returned with troubling clarity. Why would my maid of honor need a spare key when she already had access to her assigned room? Uncle David's voice echoed in my mind. When something feels off, investigate. Don't make excuses for people who matter to you. Hold them to higher standards, not lower ones. Tonight, I realized I might finally need to heed that advice. Our honeymoon suite was absolutely breathtaking, exactly what I'd dreamed of for this most sacred night. The estate staff had transformed the spacious room into a romantic sanctuary with white rose petals scattered across the four-poster bed's pristine linens, dozens of votive candles flickering on every surface, and a bottle of Dom Perignon chilling beside tall windows that offered a perfect view of Charleston's harbor lights twinkling like scattered diamonds. But as Marcus closed the heavy wooden door behind us with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence, the magical atmosphere evaporated instantly. Instead of drawing me into his arms or expressing any of the passion I'd expected after our long day of celebration, he immediately walked to the window, loosening his bow tie and staring out at the gardens with a distant, troubled expression. The silence stretched between us uncomfortably. I stood uncertainly in the middle of the room, still in my wedding gown, waiting for him to turn around, to acknowledge the significance of this moment, to show some sign of the desire we'd both been anticipating for weeks. Marcus, I said softly, approaching him and placing my hands gently on his shoulders, feeling the tension in his muscles beneath his formal jacket. Is everything all right? You seem distant tonight, almost preoccupied. He turned around slowly, and for just an instant, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, regret, fear. But then he smiled that same practiced expression I'd been noticing all day. Just exhausted, Catherine, he replied, his voice flat, despite his attempt at reassurance. It's been such an incredibly long, emotional day, and I keep thinking about that crucial meeting Monday morning with the Henderson project clients. You know how important that contract could be for the firm's expansion into the luxury market. The mention of work responsibilities on our wedding night struck me as profoundly odd and hurtful. Of course, darling. You must be completely drained. Actually, Catherine, he said, without moving toward me or showing any interest in the intimate moments we'd both been anticipating. I'm really wiped out tonight. Would you mind terribly if we just went to sleep? I know it's our wedding night, but I'm honestly not feeling up to, well, you know what I mean. Oh, his words hit me like a physical blow to the chest, leaving me breathless and confused. This was our wedding night, the night we'd talked about and anticipated for months, the night that was supposed to seal our union in the most intimate way possible. Of course, if you're too tired, I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. I completely understand. But I didn't understand at all. How could any groom be too exhausted for his wedding night? I changed into my silk nightgown in the marble bathroom alone, my hands shaking as I removed each pearl button with meticulous care. When I emerged, Marcus was already under the covers with his back turned toward me, his breathing pattern suggesting he might already be asleep. The rose petals that had seemed so romantic now looked grotesque, scattered across sheets that would remain untouched on what should have been the most passionate night of my life. Good night, Catherine, Marcus mumbled without turning around. Good night, I whispered back, knowing sleep would be impossible. I lay awake, staring at the ornate ceiling, barely visible in the dim light filtering through the heavy curtains. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight with deep, resonant tones, then 12:30, then 1:00 a.m. Uncle David's words about trusting but verifying echoed in my mind, along with that troubling email subject line, meeting with Bella privately. At exactly 1:15 a.m., according to my nightstand clock, I heard something that made my heart stop completely. It was a soft sound from somewhere else in the mansion, not the normal settling noises of a century-old building, but something deliberate and human. Muffled voices, careful footsteps, the unmistakable sound of people trying to move quietly through the halls below our room. My pulse quickened, I could feel it accelerating to at least 120 beats per minute as I strained to identify the source. The sounds seemed to be coming from directly below our room in what the estate manager had assured us were unused storage areas. I turned carefully to wake Marcus and ask if he heard anything unusual, but his side of the bed was empty. The sheets were still warm from his body heat, suggesting he'd left only moments earlier, but I hadn't heard him get up or leave the room. Where would he go at 1:15 a.m. on our wedding night without saying a word to his new wife? A chill ran down my spine as a terrible possibility occurred to me. What if one of those carefully muffled voices belonged to my husband? What if that email about meeting with Bella privately was exactly what it sounded like? My hands trembled violently as I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the thick Persian rug. I pulled on my silk robe, trying to tie the belt with fingers that shook so badly I had to make 3 attempts. My heart pounded against my ribcage so hard I was certain it must be audible throughout the quiet mansion. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead despite the comfortable temperature. I needed to find Marcus to understand where he'd gone and why he'd left our marriage bed without explanation. But more than that, I needed to investigate those sounds to either confirm or dispel the terrible suspicions that were growing in my mind like poison. I opened our bedroom door as quietly as possible, wincing when the old hinges produced a soft creak despite my careful movements. The second-floor hallway stretched before me in shadows dimly lit by antique wall sconces that cast flickering yellow light on the floral wallpaper. The hallway felt endless, at least 20 meters long, as I padded down the carpeted runner in my bare feet, the silk of my robe whispering softly with each step. The old wooden railing along the staircase felt smooth and cold under my palm as I steadied myself trying to locate the source of the sounds. Just as I reached the top of the stairs preparing to descend toward the first floor, I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me, quick light steps that definitely belonged to one of the estate staff. Panic shot through me as I realized I was about to be discovered wandering the halls in my nightgown at 1:20 a.m. Without thinking, I ducked into the nearest alcove, a small, recessed area that housed a tall, antique cabinet. The space was cramped and dark, forcing me to press my back against the cold plaster wall. While my heart hammered so loudly, I was certain it would give me away. The footsteps passed by my hiding spot, accompanied by the soft rustle of fabric and the faint scent of cleaning supplies. A night housekeeper probably making rounds or responding to a guest request. I held my breath until the sounds faded completely, then waited another full minute before emerging from my hiding place on trembling legs. The encounter had shaken me badly, but it had also reinforced my determination to investigate what was happening below. If I was going to discover the truth about those sounds and about my husband's mysterious absence, I needed to be more careful and systematic about it. I continued down the hallway, checking each guest room door as I passed. Most were closed tight, presumably housing our sleeping wedding guests, but as I approached the far end of the corridor, I noticed that the door to the Magnolia room where Isabella was staying stood slightly ajar. A sliver of warm yellow light leaked through the crack, and as I drew closer on silent feet, I could hear the faint murmur of voices from within. My rational mind desperately offered innocent explanations, even as my intuition screamed warnings I didn't want to acknowledge. That email subject line echoed in my thoughts. Meeting with Bella privately. But as I pressed my back against the hallway wall to avoid being seen through the door, the voices became clearer, and what I heard made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. God, I can't believe we actually pulled it off. Isabella's voice carried through the crack, her tone a mixture of relief and something that sounded disturbingly like triumph. When she was walking down that aisle, looking so happy, so trusting, I thought I was going to lose it completely. My hands were shaking so badly during the ceremony. You did fine, Marcus responded, his voice unmistakably intimate and warm in a way it hadn't been with me all day. The hard part's over. Now we just have to get through breakfast tomorrow, and then we can start making real plans. I pressed harder against the wall, my legs threatening to give out, as the full implications of what I was overhearing crashed over me like a tsunami of betrayal. This couldn't be what it sounded like. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. But the cold plaster against my spine, and the burning sensation spreading through my chest, told me this was devastatingly, horribly real. I still feel sick about it, though. Isabella continued, her voice carrying a note of guilt that was immediately overshadowed by excitement. She's been my best friend for 10 years, Marcus. She trusts me completely. But when you told me you wanted to be with me instead, I couldn't say no, not when you said you'd only married her because she was safe and practical. Bella, we've been through this, Marcus replied, and I heard the unmistakable rustle of fabric and soft sounds that could only suggest an intimate embrace. What we have is real. What I have with Catherine is comfortable, but it's not love. She's exactly the kind of woman my parents expected me to marry, successful, stable, perfect on paper. But you're the one who makes me feel alive. The pet name Bella hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. That was my special nickname for Isabella, born from years of friendship and countless shared secrets. Hearing it fall so intimately from Marcus's lips felt like a violation of everything sacred between us. Tell me about the 6 months again, Isabella whispered, her voice dropping so low I had to strain to hear through the door. Tell me how it started. You know how it started, Marcus replied with a low chuckle that made my skin crawl. Your birthday party back in March. Catherine had to work late for that trunk show, remember? You looked so incredible in that blue dress, and after a few glasses of wine, we couldn't pretend anymore that what we felt was just friendship. 6 months. The words echoed in my mind like gunshots ricocheting off the walls of my skull. That meant their affair had begun right around the time we'd been addressing wedding invitations, when I'd been excitedly planning our honeymoon to Italy and talking about starting a family within the next 2 years. Sometimes I felt so guilty lying to her face every day. Isabella said, though her tone suggested the guilt wasn't overwhelming enough to stop her. Especially when she kept thanking me for being such a supportive friend. But Marcus, I've been jealous of her for so long. Her success, her confidence, the way everything comes so easily to her. When you chose me over her, it was like finally getting something she couldn't have. Don't feel guilty, Marcus replied, and I heard what sounded like a long, lingering kiss that made my chest feel like it was being crushed by invisible hands. She'll be fine. Catherine's stronger than she knows, and this way we both get what we really want without having to hurt anyone more than necessary. The casual cruelty of his words hit me like repeated physical blows. I wasn't his beloved wife. I was an obstacle to be managed, a practical choice he'd made while saving his genuine passion for someone else. Through the crack in the door, I caught glimpses of movement shadows merging and separating in ways that left absolutely no doubt about the intimate nature of what was occurring just feet away from where I sat, paralyzed with shock and grief. What happens now? Isabella asked, her voice breathless with desire and anticipation. How long do we have to keep pretending? Not long, Marcus replied confidently. I'll give it a few months, maybe 6. Let things settle into a routine. Let her get comfortable being married. Then I'll tell her I'm not happy, that I need space to figure things out. By then, you'll have found a new job in another city, maybe Atlanta, like we discussed. I'll follow you there for a fresh start, and Catherine will be too proud to fight for a marriage that's obviously over. And you think she'll just let you go? Isabella sounded almost disappointed, as if she'd hoped for more drama. Catherine's not the type to make scenes or beg, Marcus said with certainty that made me realize he'd never truly known me at all. She'll be hurt, but she'll convince herself it's for the best. She might even thank us eventually for not dragging it out longer than necessary. The grandfather clock chimed 2:00 a.m., its deep tones reverberating through the mansion like a funeral bell. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held me motionless, and I struggled to my feet on unsteady legs, using the wall for support as black spots danced at the edges of my vision. Standing in that dark hallway, my silk nightgown providing no protection against the chill that had settled deep into my bones, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The crushing pain was still there, but underneath it, a different feeling was taking root. Anger. Clean, sharp, clarifying anger that cut through the fog of shock and devastation like a blade. I had done absolutely nothing to deserve this betrayal. I had loved them both honestly and completely, had been a devoted partner to Marcus and a loyal friend to Isabella for years. Their deception was about their own moral failures and character defects, not about any inadequacy or failing on my part. As I made my way back to what I could no longer think of as our room, my mind began to clear and focus with laser-like precision. Uncle David had been right about trusting, but verifying. I'd verified the worst possible scenario, but now I had the truth, and the truth, however devastating, was better than living a lie. Tomorrow morning, I would face them both with what I'd discovered. I would reclaim my dignity and my life from the people who had tried to steal both while I slept. I didn't sleep at all during the remaining hours before dawn. Instead, I sat in the antique velvet armchair by the French doors, still wearing my silk nightgown and robe, watching the sun slowly rise over Rosewood Manor's manicured gardens, while my entire world restructured itself around this devastating reality. I used those dark hours to plan exactly what I would say, how I would handle the confrontation that was now inevitable. My initial shock gradually transformed into something harder and more focused with each passing hour, marked by the grandfather clock's solemn chimes. At exactly 6:30 a.m., I heard the heavy wooden door open with its characteristic creak. Marcus slipped inside quietly, moving with the careful steps of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse. In the pale morning light streaming through the sheer curtains, I could see him clearly, his hair disheveled and damp with perspiration, his formal wedding shirt wrinkled, and only half-buttoned his bow tie hanging loosely around his neck like evidence of guilt. He had the unmistakable appearance of a man returning from another woman's bed. He froze completely when he saw me sitting by the window, fully awake, and obviously waiting for him. His face cycled rapidly through expressions: surprise, guilt, fear, calculation, and finally a forced casualness that made my stomach clench with revulsion. "Well, Catherine," he said softly, attempting what I'm sure he thought was a disarming smile. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep post-wedding excitement keeping you awake?" The sheer audacity of his lie, delivered with smooth confidence, while evidence of betrayal was written all over his disheveled appearance, ignited the carefully controlled fury I'd been containing all night. "No, Marcus," I said, my voice steady and clear despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. I couldn't sleep because my husband of less than 12 hours left our marriage bed to spend the night with my best friend. I heard everything, Marcus. Every word about your 6-month affair, every detail about your plans to leave me in a few months, every cruel comment about how I'll be too proud to fight for our marriage when you tell me you're unhappy. All color drained from his face instantly, and he took an involuntary step backward as if my words had physically struck him. For several long seconds, we stared at each other in complete silence, him calculating his next move, me waiting to see whether he would continue lying or finally show me the basic respect of honesty. "Catherine, I don't know what you think you heard, but you're obviously confused. Stop." The word came out like a whip crack, sharp and final. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence by lying to me again. I heard you tell Isabella that she looked incredible in that blue dress at her birthday party in March. I heard you discuss your plans to move to Atlanta together after you convince me our marriage is over. I heard you call her Bella, my nickname for her, like it was natural to you." Marcus's carefully constructed facade began to crumble under the weight of specific details he couldn't explain away. His shoulders sagged, and he sat heavily on the edge of our unmade bed. How could you? I continued, my voice growing stronger as my anger crystallized. How could you marry me yesterday while planning to leave me today? How could you let me stand at that altar and promise to love you forever when you were already in love with someone else? It's not that simple, Catherine, Marcus said, finally, his voice taking on a manipulative tone I'd never heard before. You're being hysterical about this. You obviously misunderstood what you heard. Isabella and I are just friends. Don't. I stood up abruptly, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Don't you dare try to gaslight me, Marcus. I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. I saw you touching her at the fountain yesterday. I saw her get that spare room key from the estate manager. I saw the way you looked at her during the ceremony like she was the person you really wanted to be marrying. Marcus's expression shifted again, this time to something I'd never seen before. Cold calculation mixed with a hint of cruelty. Fine, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone. You want the truth? Here's the truth. Yes, I'm in love with Isabella. Yes, we've been together for 6 months. And yes, I married you because you're the safe choice, the practical choice, the choice that makes sense on paper. The casual brutality of his admission hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let him see how much it hurt. Isabella understands me in ways you never could. He continued, his voice growing more vicious with each word. She's passionate, unpredictable, exciting. You're comfortable, reliable. The kind of woman who builds a successful business and makes a good wife, but you're not the kind of woman who makes a man's heart race. Then why marry me at all? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because, Marcus said with a cruel smile, comfortable and reliable is what the Hayes family expects. Isabella comes from nothing, Catherine. Her background, her family situation, she could never be the kind of wife my parents would accept or my business associates would respect. But you're perfect for that role. Just then, a soft knock interrupted us, followed by Isabella's cheerful voice calling out, Catherine, are you awake? I brought coffee and thought we could have some girl talk before breakfast. The sheer audacity of her casual arrival after spending the night with my husband pushed me past any remaining restraint. I strode to the door and yanked it open, revealing Isabella standing in the hallway wearing silk pajamas and holding 2 steaming coffee cups, her face bright with what appeared to be genuine excitement to see me. Good morning, beautiful bride, she said with radiant enthusiasm that made my stomach lurch with disgust. I thought you might want some caffeine before we head down to... Her words died instantly as she took in my appearance, my red-rimmed eyes, my pale complexion, my rigid posture, and saw Marcus sitting disheveled on the bed behind me, looking like a man who'd been caught in the worst possible act. The coffee cups slipped from her hands, crashing to the hardwood floor in an explosion of brown liquid and shattered porcelain that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent room. Her face went ashen as she realized their carefully constructed deception had finally irreversibly collapsed. Catherine, she whispered, her voice shaking with what might have been genuine fear. I can explain everything. Please, please let me explain. Huss! Can you? I stepped aside to let her into the room, closing the door firmly behind her. Please, Isabella, explain how my best friend of 10 years decided that her jealousy of my success was more important than our friendship. Explain how you could stand beside me at that altar yesterday, holding my bouquet, promising to support our marriage, while planning to steal my husband. Isabella began to cry, not delicate tears of remorse, but ugly, desperate sobbing that shook her entire body. I never meant for this to happen, she wailed, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine anguish. But Catherine, I've been jealous of you for so long. Everything comes so easily to you, your business, your confidence, the way everyone loves you. I've spent years watching you succeed, while I struggled just to keep my head above water. So you decided to destroy me to make yourself feel better. I asked quietly, my voice deadly calm. When Marcus started paying attention to me when he said I was exciting and passionate. Isabella continued through her tears. It was the first time in my life I had something you wanted. The first time I felt special, important, worth choosing over you. We never meant to hurt you, Marcus interjected, but his voice lacked conviction. What Isabella and I have? It's not something we planned. It's bigger than both of us. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed, "Mom?" And something about the early hour made me answer despite the chaos unfolding in our room. "Catherine, sweetheart." My mother's voice came through clearly. "I know it's early, but I couldn't sleep. That mother's intuition I mentioned yesterday has been keeping me awake all night. I keep thinking about how Marcus seemed to be performing rather than feeling yesterday and how Isabella was acting so strangely. Your father once told me that when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Are you okay, honey?" The timing was so perfect, it took my breath away. "Actually, Mom," I said, looking directly at Marcus and Isabella, "I need to tell you something important. Can you call Uncle David and ask him to come back to the estate? I'm going to need a ride home, and I have some things to explain to everyone at breakfast." After I hung up, the room fell into heavy silence. Marcus and Isabella exchanged a look of pure panic, finally understanding that their deception was about to become public knowledge. "Catherine, please," Marcus said, standing up and reaching for me. "Can't we discuss this rationally? Work through it somehow?" When he grabbed my arm, his grip was harder than necessary, his fingers digging into my skin with surprising force that made me wince in pain. "You're being irrational about this," he continued, his voice taking on a threatening edge I'd never heard before. "You need to calm down and think about what you're doing." "Let go of me," I said firmly, trying to pull away from his grasp. Instead of releasing me, Marcus tightened his grip, his face twisting with frustration and anger. "You're going to ruin everything," he hissed, "over a misunderstanding that could be worked out if you just listened to reason." The transformation was startling and terrifying. The polished, charming architect I'd married had vanished, replaced by someone whose eyes held a coldness that made my blood run cold. This was who Marcus really was beneath the civilized facade, someone who would use physical intimidation when manipulation failed. I said, "Let go of me." I yanked my arm away with more force than I'd known I possessed, stumbling backward until I collided with the antique wooden balustrade of a nearby chair. I grasped it firmly with both hands, my knuckles white with the effort to maintain my balance while my heart pounded at what felt like 150 beats per minute. Cold sweat ran down my back as I realized how quickly Marcus had turned from pleading to physical intimidation. "Don't you ever touch me again," I said, my voice shaking with rage and shock at this glimpse of who he really was beneath the polished exterior. Isabella seemed oblivious to what had just happened, too wrapped up in her own panic to notice Marcus's threatening behavior. "Catherine, our friendship means everything to me," she pleaded through her tears. "Don't let this destroy 10 years of history between us. I love you like a sister." "Well, you don't betray someone you love like a sister," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her sobs like a blade. "You don't lie to someone you love for 6 months while plotting to steal their husband. You destroyed our friendship the moment you decided your jealousy was more important than my trust." "Please." Marcus tried one more time, his voice taking on a wheedling tone that made my skin crawl. "Think about what you're doing. Think about both our reputations, our families, the embarrassment this will cause everyone. We can work this out privately like adults." "Adults don't lie and cheat and manipulate people who love them," I replied firmly. "Adults don't marry someone while planning to leave them. Adults don't grab their wives when they don't get their way." As they gathered their belongings with awkward, shameful efficiency, Isabella's sobs echoing through the room as she packed the bridesmaid dress she'd never wear again. Marcus, moving with mechanical precision, while shooting me occasional looks of pure hatred, I felt strangely calm and centered. The worst was over. The truth was finally out in the open where it belonged. Uncle David had been right about trusting, but verifying, and Mom had been right about trusting a mother's intuition. Most importantly, I'd learned something crucial about my own strength. I could survive the complete destruction of everything I'd believed about my life, and I could do it with my dignity intact. When they reached the door, Isabella turned back one final time, her face streaked with makeup and what might have been genuine remorse. "Catherine, I hope someday, I said quietly but firmly, I hope you both understand what you've truly lost. Not just me, but your ability to trust yourselves or believe in your own capacity for loyalty and honor. If you can betray someone who loved you as completely as I loved both of you, you can ultimately betray anyone. Remember that when you look at each other in the months and years to come." The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my wedding night, but feeling for the first time in hours like I could breathe clearly again. The truth, however devastating, had finally set me free from their web of lies and manipulation. At exactly 8:00 a.m., I walked into the estate's sun-drenched breakfast room wearing a simple navy dress and my grandmother's pearl necklace armor of dignity for what would be the most difficult but necessary conversation of my life. Our wedding guests sat around the elegant mahogany table chatting comfortably over coffee and the estate's famous blueberry pancakes, their faces bright with post-celebration contentment that I was about to shatter completely with the truth they deserved to hear. Uncle David had arrived 20 minutes earlier after Mom's urgent phone call and was sitting quietly beside her with the same steady presence that had always reminded me of my father. Mom had clearly filled him in on the basics because his weathered face was set in grim lines of barely controlled anger. Good morning, sweetheart," Mom said, her welcoming smile faltering immediately when she noticed my pale complexion and the careful, controlled way I held myself. "Are you ready to tell us what happened? Actually, I need everyone's attention for something very important," I said, remaining standing while choosing my words carefully. "Marcus and Isabella left the estate early this morning because last night I discovered them together in her room. They've been having an affair for 6 months throughout our entire engagement. They had plans to continue their relationship after our marriage with Marcus, eventually leaving me to follow Isabella to Atlanta. Our marriage is over before it truly began." The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. My words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning the joy and celebration that had filled this room just moments before. Mom's hand flew to cover her mouth, tears immediately springing to her eyes as the full implications hit her. "Oh, Catherine. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. But I'm also proud of you for trusting your instincts and investigating when something felt wrong." I heard them discussing their relationship in explicit detail. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I confronted them both this morning, and Marcus admitted everything. He told me he married me because I was the safe choice, the practical choice, while Isabella was the one who made his heart race. They've left together, and I'll be filing for annulment as soon as legally possible." The room erupted into controlled chaos, gasps of disbelief and outrage, angry muttering questions overlapping as everyone tried to understand how such a betrayal could have occurred during what should have been a celebration of love and commitment. Uncle David immediately stood and came to my side, his presence solid and reassuring. "Catherine," he said firmly, "your father would be incredibly proud of how you handled this situation. You trusted your instincts, you investigated when something felt wrong, and you faced the truth with courage and dignity. that takes tremendous strength. Marcus's parents, Patricia and Richard Hayes, looked stricken. Richard stood slowly, his face gray with shame and anger. "Catherine, I cannot express how ashamed we are of our son's behavior. This is not how we raised him, and it's not the kind of man we thought he was. You have our complete support, and Marcus is no longer welcome in our home until he can provide an explanation that doesn't exist." Patricia was crying openly now. "That poor girl," she whispered. "To be betrayed by both her husband and her best friend on her wedding night. Catherine, dear, you're stronger than you know, and you deserve so much better than what our son gave you." Over the next hour, as the initial shock began to wear off and people processed what had happened, I found myself surrounded by an outpouring of support that reinforced my decision to tell the truth rather than protect the people who had betrayed me. 6 months later, February 2024, the legal annulment was finalized on a gray February morning in Charleston Family Court, the dissolution taking place in a sterile courtroom that bore no resemblance to the romantic garden where I'd spoken my vows. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, had looked over the evidence of fraud and deception with obvious distaste before granting my petition without hesitation. "Mrs. Morrison," she said as she signed the final paperwork, "I've seen many cases of marital fraud, but rarely one so calculated and cruel. You have my sympathy and my admiration for your strength in pursuing the truth." I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months, as if I'd finally set down a crushing burden that had been weighing down my spirit and preventing me from moving forward with my life. During those difficult months of legal proceedings and emotional recovery, my boutique became my salvation and sanctuary. Without the emotional energy I'd been unconsciously devoting to managing Marcus's moods and maintaining our relationship, I discovered reserves of creativity and business acumen I'd never fully tapped into before. I threw myself into expanding threads of grace with a passion that surprised even me. I enrolled in advanced business courses at the College of Charleston, learning about marketing strategies, financial management, and growth planning. The coursework was challenging but exhilarating. I was finally investing in myself and my dreams without having to consider someone else's opinions or limitations. Within 6 months, I'd opened 2 additional locations. The Savannah shop specialized in restored vintage wedding gowns, where I could help other brides create their perfect day while processing my own complicated relationship with marriage. The Columbia location focused on everyday vintage clothing for women who wanted to express their individuality through unique fashion choices. My annual revenue increased by over 200%, and Charleston Business Journal featured me as Entrepreneur of the Year, with a cover story titled, "Rising from the Ashes: How Personal Tragedy Became Professional Triumph." The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman whose wedding had been destroyed was now helping other women feel beautiful and confident in their most important moments. The healing process wasn't linear or easy. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, replaying every moment of my relationship with Marcus and wondering how I'd missed so many warning signs. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who helped me understand that my trusting nature wasn't a weakness to be corrected, but a strength that had been exploited by people with weak character. "You loved authentically and completely," Dr. Chen told me during one of our sessions. "The fact that they were incapable of receiving and returning that love says nothing about your worth and everything about their character defects." I also learned more about what had happened to Marcus and Isabella after they left the estate together. According to mutual acquaintances, their relationship had imploded within 4 months when Marcus was caught cheating with a 22-year-old intern from his firm. Isabella, who had quit her job and moved to Atlanta based on his promises, found herself alone in a new city with no support system and a reputation that had preceded her. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. A relationship built on deception and betrayal had destroyed itself through more deception and betrayal. Marcus's parents, true to their word, had cut him off financially and removed him from his position at the family firm. He was working for a small architecture company in Atlanta, his career prospects severely damaged by the scandal that had followed him. Isabella had eventually found work at a marketing firm in Atlanta, but she'd lost most of her Charleston friends and social connections. I heard through the grapevine that she'd tried to reach out to some of our mutual college friends, hoping to rebuild her social circle, but word of what she'd done had spread through our alumni network. Actions have consequences, and the consequences of betraying someone who had loved you unconditionally for 10 years were long-lasting and severe. 1 year later, September 2024, it was at a small business owners conference in Atlanta. Ironically, the city where Marcus and Isabella had planned their new life together, that I met Daniel Christopher Mason. He owned 3 independent bookstore cafes throughout Georgia that combined his love of literature with community gathering spaces where people could connect over coffee books and meaningful conversation. Unlike Marcus, who had always seemed restless and distracted when I discussed my work, Daniel asked thoughtful, engaging questions about the restoration process and listened with genuine interest to my passion for preserving fashion history and helping women feel beautiful. There was something refreshingly straightforward about his manner. No hidden agendas, no practiced charm, just authentic interest in knowing me as a complete person. "You absolutely light up when you talk about your business," he observed over coffee during our first conversation. "It's beautiful to watch someone who's found their true calling and has the courage to pursue it despite obstacles." Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on friendship and mutual respect, rather than passion and fantasy. Daniel had been through his own difficult divorce 3 years earlier, when his ex-wife left him for her personal trainer, so he understood the importance of rebuilding trust gradually and honestly. "I'm not looking to rescue you or be rescued by you," he told me one evening as we walked through Forsyth Park in Savannah, where we'd met for one of our weekend visits. "I like the woman you are, now the life you've built for yourself. I'm hoping there might be room in that life for partnership with someone who sees your strength and wants to support it, not control it." 2 years later, September 2025, Daniel and I were married on a Tuesday morning at Charleston City Hall, wearing simple clothes we'd chosen together and exchanging vows we'd written ourselves during quiet evenings on my porch. Our only witnesses were my mother, Uncle David, and Daniel's sister Sarah. There were no bridesmaids, no elaborate reception, no opportunities for betrayal, because we'd kept our sacred moment small, protected, and entirely our own creation. The vows we exchanged were nothing like the traditional words I'd spoken to Marcus. Instead, we promised to be honest with each other always, to investigate concerns rather than ignore them, to support each other's individual growth, and to never take each other's trust for granted. "I promise to love you not despite your strength and independence, but because of them," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving mine. "I promise to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me and to earn it fresh every day." Afterward, we had lunch at a quiet restaurant overlooking Charleston Harbor, then returned to our respective businesses, him to his bookstore, me to my boutique. It wasn't the fairy tale wedding I'd once dreamed of, but it was real and honest and completely authentic to who we'd become together. That evening, we sat on the porch swing of the Victorian house we'd bought together near downtown Charleston. The September air was soft and warm, filled with the scent of jasmine from our garden. Daniel handed me chamomile tea while he drank coffee, and our rescue dog, a gentle golden retriever we'd named Hemingway, slept contentedly at our feet. "Any regrets about our simple ceremony?" he asked quietly. I thought about the naive woman I'd been 2 years earlier, trusting to the point of blindness, willing to ignore obvious warning signs in service of maintaining peace, explaining away red flags instead of investigating them properly, as Uncle David had taught me. "None whatsoever," I said, meaning every word with complete conviction. "Everything that happened led me to this moment, to this life, to you. I learned to verify red flags early instead of explaining them away. I learned that my worthiness of love was never dependent on someone else's ability to recognize it. Most importantly, I learned the difference between trust and naivety." As the sun set over Charleston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I realized my story hadn't ended with betrayal and heartbreak. It had simply been redirected towards something infinitely better and more authentic. The woman who now sat in her garden with chamomile tea at 6 p.m., holding Daniel's hand while Hemingway slept at our feet, was stronger after the breaking wiser, after the deception more grateful for authentic love, because she'd survived the counterfeit version. Last month in our garden, surrounded by blooming jasmine, I finally burned that small wooden box containing mementos from my wedding night discovery. I watched the smoke rise and dissipate in the evening air, carrying away the last remnants of pain that had once defined me, but no longer controlled my present or future. As those ashes scattered on the Carolina breeze, I felt complete peace with my own story. The act of burning those memories wasn't about forgetting the past, but about refusing to let it define my future. I had learned the most important lesson of all that investigating red flags early, trusting your instincts and refusing to accept dismissive explanations when something feels wrong can save you years of pain and heartache. The email I'd glimpsed and almost ignored had been my father's voice speaking through my intuition, urging me to dig deeper rather than explain away what didn't feel right. Uncle David's advice about trusting but verifying had saved me from a lifetime of deception, and Mom's mother's intuition had been the gentle push I needed to take those warnings seriously. What do you think about my journey from betrayal to rebirth? From which city are you reading this story? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences with trust, betrayal, or rebuilding in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles becomes the most powerful healing of all. If this story resonated with you, please share your own experiences. Your courage might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.